Jack Werner asks, what is your opinion on the time when Spaceship Earth had the Sorcerer Mickey's wand with 2000 on it to celebrate the new millennium, as well as afterwards when it was switched to an Epcot sign? Jack, we don't talk about that. It never happened. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Disney Q&A, the series in which you ask me all sorts of questions about Disney, the park, the company, the history, the movies, and I try to give you answers to the best of my ability. As always, we're going to kick off this episode by throwing out a few of the better answers for last week's question of the week, which was all about how you would retheme the Tower of Terror over in Orlando if you had to retheme it. You couldn't answer with no retheming it or getting rid of it. If you had to retheme it, what would it be? There were a ton of great answers. In fact, I highly suggest, if you haven't checked it out, to go check out the last episode and go look through the comments, because there were some people who got really detailed with their plans for this, and they were all over the place. And so, it's really worth going back to. I could probably have filled a whole video just going over people's answers, but I had to pick two, and the two I picked, one came from SEJ101, who says, if the Tower of Terror had to be rethemed, I would pick Gravity Falls or The Rocketeer. I think The Rocketeer would attract more kids to see the movie, and fans of the movie would love it. And Gravity Falls legit says gravity makes you fall. Gravity Falls, I think, would be a cool one, because I don't think you see a lot of Disney animation represented in the parks these days, by which I mean like the TV stuff, not the movies. And Gravity Falls, I think, is one of the more popular of the recent shows out there, so I think that would be cool to do. But I'm also a big fan of The Rocketeer, because I love that movie. And not only that, but they're remaking The Rocketeer, or soft rebooting it, or making a sequel, whatever you want to call it. So it is going to be in people's minds in the near future when that movie comes out. So I think that'd be a cool way to sort of reintroduce it back into the parks. Right now, the only reference to Rocketeer in the parks is in Hollywood Studios. There's I think it's like an ice cream or a drink stand over by Echo Lake, where you can see the Rocketeer's jetpack and helmet on a shelf, and that's it. But to get its own attraction would be amazing. And then the second question comes from Marshall6000, who says, I really hope they don't retheme it, since this is good. This is the good version. But if I had to choose, I'd say maybe Tomorrowland the movie, and have the scene where the building in Tomorrowland is falling, or the elevator that lets you see into the future, or maybe even the Eiffel Tower scene. But in any case, I don't know if it would even fit that well, to be honest. I love this idea because I think it's really weird. Well, one, I like the idea because I actually like Tomorrowland the movie. It didn't do very well, and unfortunately we probably won't see a sequel, and I could go off on a whole video as to why I think that's the case, but I think it was a decent movie, and I wish we did see it pan out, because I do think Disney had plans to expand on that universe if they did. I also like the idea of representing Tomorrowland in the Hollywood Studios, the idea that you have a ride in Hollywood Studios based on a movie, based on a land in the Magic Kingdom. It seems so like cross-pollinating there. But pointing out things like the Eiffel Tower or that elevator, I think does really go with that up and down mechanic that I think would work with Hollywood Tower Hotel. So I think that's a great answer, and I think there are plenty other great answers. So like I said, check out the last episode when this one's over and read through some of these really cool ideas people have. That said, let's jump right into questions. Our first question this week comes from Lindsay Yale Entertainment, who says, when did Disney switch from the ticket books to the one-day tickets? Now, if you don't know the history here, if maybe you're a younger guest to the Disney parks, there used to be a time where you didn't just get to ride whatever you want whenever you wanted. The idea was you would pay a small entry fee to get into the parks. This was Disneyland and Disney World when it first opened. And then you would buy a ticket book, and you'd have different classes of tickets, and each ticket cost a different amount. And so that would get you onto certain rides. And if you haven't heard it before, there's a term that goes around whenever there's a big ride being built. They call it an e-ticket attraction. Well, that term comes from these days where they had ticket books. E-tickets were the most expensive tickets. They were for the big, massive, like crowd drawing rides. And so that terminology stuck around even though the tickets didn't. As for when they started to fade it out, it was the late 70s, early 80s. I believe 81, 82 is when it was officially gone. And the idea was it was partially competition with other parks like Six Flags that were offering, full day tickets that let you ride anything. But on top of that, you had places like Disney World that were opening parks like Epcot. So then when you had different parks, you were trying to keep people there longer, right? That's how the whole system changed when it came to Disney World. Originally, the idea was you want to get people there, you want to get them on rides. You want them paying so they could go on more and more rides. But eventually, as you add more parks, what it became about as a business was getting people to stay on property longer. And so they started offering these full day tickets. And I believe it was 1981 in California when they sort of phased out the ticket books, and it might have been 81 or 82 in Walt Disney World when they were phased out. And so they started selling what they called passport tickets. And so you'd have a 1 or 2 day passport ticket. I think you kind of still see similar ticket deals over in California since they only have the 2 parks. And now, of course, you have the tickets over on the East Coast with the park hopping. I think there's park hopping on the West Coast too. But essentially the early 80s is when all of that changed. And I think it changed for the better because, you no longer had to consider the cost of your vacation when you were in the parks and actually going on different rides. You just had to worry about the cost to get in. And once you got in, you could have as much fun as you want. So I think it was a really good decision on their part. Our next question comes from Drummer Master, and Drummer Master asks, if you could live in any Epcot Center Future World Pavilion, where would you live? Whichever you pick, would you leave it as your own personal ride with a bedroom, or would you just make a home in there with the building? So I guess the idea being whatever you picked, you could either keep it as a ride or just convert it into a home. So here's the catch. I'm going to say Horizons, and the reason I'm going to say Horizons is because in your question you say Epcot Center. And Epcot Center is not the name of the park anymore. Now it's called Epcot. So if you're saying Epcot Center, we're talking about old Epcot. And so in my mind, Horizons is still there. And obviously I would pick that one because it's my favorite ride. And in fact, I plan to do a video in the future all about why it's my favorite ride. Now, I would keep it as a ride because I want people to enjoy it. I would want people to ride it and have fun, so I'd have like a little area. Epcot was a park in which many of these pavilions, which were corporately sponsored, had their own corporate lounges up on the second floor or elsewhere in the building, so that employees or executives from those companies could visit for meetings or bring clients there, and then, sort of give them a nice treat, treat them well, and they can check out the ride and stuff like that. What's really cool is if you do the Future World tour over at Disney World, they'll actually take you into some of those corporate lounges. I did one a couple of years ago, and we got to go to the HP one over at the Mission Space attraction, which is really cool because it's got a window that lets you look down into the queue area. So that's what I would do. I would convert that like little lounge area into an apartment, and I would live on the attraction, and I would ride it every single day because it'd be really fun. And that question from Drummer Master is our question of the week. So let me know in the comments below or on Twitter what attraction or pavilion, doesn't have to be Epcot, we'll do it all around the world, would you want to live in, and how would you do it? Would you convert it into a house and just live there privately, or would you keep it as a ride and find a place to sleep in there? Our next question comes from Koi, and Koi asks, if Disney were to create a ride based off of a video game property, what property would you like to see, and what type of ride would fit it best? Now, great question. I enjoy this one because I love video games and I love Disney. I'm actually going to go with an answer that I had discussed with Kat and Christine on our latest trip to Disney World, and I had recorded part of it with my phone and part of it with my camera, and it didn't come out very well, so it ended up not showing up in one of the vlogs, but it should have. And that was how we discussed how we would go about creating a ride based on the Uncharted video games in Walt Disney World. And a lot of it got ridiculous and involved a whole bunch of technology that probably isn't around these days. But I guess if we were realistically to create an Uncharted ride, you have to, one, recognize that Uncharted is very similar in theme and plot and character to Indiana Jones. That's usually what it's compared to. And Indiana Jones has a ride. So, I mean, I guess the lazy answer is you can do an Indiana Jones adventure, take the ride from California and replace it with Nathan Drake, and there you go. You've got an attraction. What I think would be cool is sort of a simulator experience, and I don't fully know how this would work, but all I'm thinking of for some reason is the ride vehicle from Dinosaur and Indiana Jones. It's sort of giant moving vehicle that has hydraulics, so it can do a lot of shaking. And I'm also thinking of the screen from Soarin' that allows you to sort of like fill your entire field of view so it feels like you're somewhere else, and somehow combining the two to create this experience in which it's sort of like a simulator like Star Tours, but not really, because you're not enclosed, and sort of working in real world elements so it at least feels like you're actually moving and there are real props there. And Maybe I'm also sort of thinking a little bit of Pirates of the Caribbean over in Shanghai, the new Disney parks that uses a lot of rear projection. So while you're still using actual models, you're still using animatronics, but in the back, rather than matte paintings or, set pieces, you have projected backgrounds that are, way better with special effects and movement and stuff like that. And I think it'd be cool to do something from the second Uncharted game. If you've ever played the 3, I think the second sort of stands as one of the best, and I think it'd be really cool to do something with like the collapsing building or who knows, there's so much from that game, but it's another great question. But that's what I would do. I'd do it Uncharted. I think that is the most cinematic of the video games I've played, and the game where I most want to be put into the world of that game through a ride. Our next question comes from Bobby. I don't know how you got that YouTube name, but you're lucky. Bobby asks, is there an annual pass that works for both Disneyland and Disney World? If so, how much is it? Or if not, do you think they should have one, and how much do you think it should cost? Well, Bobby, they actually do have one. It is called it's called the Disney Premier Pass, and it is, as you described, it is an annual pass that lets you go in any day of the year to either any of the Disney World parks or the Disneyland parks, save, money on restaurants and merchandise and stuff like that. They just recently bumped up the price, I believe. So now it runs about $1,500 a year. So I think it's like $1,490 something. So it's about, once you get taxes involved, it'll be over $1,500. And yeah, it exists. I would love to get to the point in my life where I'm visiting these parks on both coasts enough that I would need something like that. But I feel like for most people, it's probably not the case. But yeah, it's cool. It's cool that they have one. Now, the next question is, will they ever have one that lets you get into any of the theme parks around the world? My guess is probably not, but I think it would be cool, and I think it'd be really expensive. And it'd be a real tax nightmare for them, considering it's for all these different countries. Our next question comes from Hannah Rocco, and Hannah asks, I had asked you this question a couple of years ago when you first started these Q&As, but I was wondering if your answer has changed since then and since you've bought your first annual pass. Would you ever consider buying into DVC? My family from Canada bought into it a couple of years ago, and that is when we also bought our annual passes. So, annual passes, we just talked about. DVC is the Disney Vacation Club. It's sort of like Disney's timeshare, where you're buying into a certain resort that they've got there, and you're getting points and using those points to spend on stays. And it has value for families, I think, that plan to go to the parks a lot or every year or regularly. For me, honestly, even though I'm an annual pass holder now, and being a DVC member does have perks, like you do get, I think it's $100 off of an annual pass. It's sort of not on my radar at all, and I think part of that is because the buy-in price is really expensive. So the idea is you're buying a certain amount of points that you get to use every year, and those points all cost a certain amount, and you're paying quite a bit of money. Like, I did a calculator, and it was like 300 points came out to, was it like $30 plus $1,000, and then you're paying, annual dues and stuff like that. And that doesn't mean that the DVC isn't worth the money. I think if you're a family that visits regularly, it probably is, and you're going to regularly visit in the future, it probably is. The value, I think, of DVC is the idea of, you're paying up front for these points that you use every year. That price is set when you pay up front. Now, that said, every year the price of hotels goes up a little bit. So if in 10 years you think you'll still be going to Disney every year, and you'll still be staying on property, would you rather pay prices for 2026 or would you rather pay prices for 2016? And so that's sort of the idea, is you're paying up front so that you could use these over the course of, potentially decades. As somebody who doesn't own a house yet, I've always felt like something like a timeshare or a DVC would be something that I'd consider after I made that hurdle of adulthood and buying a house, just because, like I said, it was like $30,000, $35,000. Like, if I had that kind of money that I could spend on something like a vacation, I'd probably sooner put it into a down payment for a house. So it's not on my radar yet. I don't know if it ever will be. That's the other thing, is you're sort of putting into points for a home resort, and I think you can spend them elsewhere, but I don't know. I like the flexibility of planning each Disney trip in the moment and not having something planned out ahead of time, and knowing that DVC is mainly for people who sort of want to get that taken care of ahead of time. It might not be something for me even after I do have a house one day. And our final question this week comes from Jonah Rierick. Rierick? I hope I pronounced that right. And it's one I haven't actually prepared for. It is, what is your favorite attraction backstory? So this is a question I didn't prepare for, and I wasn't actually sure what the question was asking, because I figured there are two ways to go about it. There's the question of, your favorite backstory for within the world of the attraction, or there's like backstory of how the attraction got made and sort of the real life element of it. I'm going to answer both. I'm going to answer them pretty briefly. If I had to go in world, I would say Horizons. I love the fact that it both looks back on the history of how we looked at the future and transportation and evolution, and how it still has this positive outlook on the future. It doesn't get gloomy or dark. You got people living in space, you got people living under the ocean. It all sort of ties together where, the family in the desert and underwater, they all sort of are, it's one family spread out across these three different really unique and new ways to live. And I like that it was like very loosely considered a spiritual successor to the Carousel of Progress. And so if I had to also, answer the question as to which backstory do I like in terms of the ride creation, I would go to the Carousel of Progress. And I guess by extension a little bit, it's a small world and moments with Mr. Lincoln and the Ford Pavilion, because I really like the history of the World's Fair with Disney and how he used the World's Fair not only to gauge East Coast interest and seeing if there would be, interest in having a Disney World on the East Coast, but also he basically used these companies to pay for his R&D for these new attractions and then to keep the attractions. And I think from a business perspective, that was just a genius move. And it was one that wasn't done up front. He's like, oh, I'll do it. You pay me, we'll build this attraction for this World's Fair. But in the back of his mind, he had these plans to, use it to further his research and development, to see how people reacted to it for his grand plans with the East Coast Disney project. And so, I don't know, I always think that's a really cool story and one that I always turn back to. Anyway, bunch of great questions this week. I want to thank you all. If you have a question that you'd like for me to answer, you can let me know in the comments below, or you can let me know on Twitter. I'm at Rob Plays. Again, also looking for answers on which attraction in all of the Disney parks would you like to live in, and how would you live in it? You let me know. I'll pick out one or two for the next episode. If you want more Disney content just like this, all you have to do is hit that subscribe button. I do 3 videos a week. And if you want even more Disney content, every week, Christine and I do a podcast called the Tomorrowland Transit Authorities. You can find us on iTunes, on Google Play. I have a link in the description below to it, or on our website at ttapodcast.com. Thank you all for watching. Have a great week. Whatever you're doing, make the most of it. Makes it that much better. And I hope to see you all next time for the next Disney Q&A. Bye, everybody. This month, we're going to be taking a look at one of my favorite books. It is the book about the history of Disney World specifically, and it is called Reality Land by David Koenig, The True Life Adventures at Walt Disney World. It's an unauthorized book about the history of Disney World.